Hey, good afternoon, everyone. Sorry about the couple of kinks. I think we have everything ironed out. If you all could let me know in the chat if you can hear me and if you can see a screen share of Microsoft Word, then that would be fantastic. So I'm getting some notes that audio and video are coming through. Thank you very much. We should be good on, let me check one more thing. Yes, just double checking captions. Fantastic. Thank you everybody for your patience there for the first 5 minutes or so. Really appreciate that. My name is Rob Carr. I am Technology Accessibility Program Manager for Oklahoma Able Tech. We are the Assistive Technology Act program for the state of Oklahoma, and we are bringing this webinar to you today thanks to the AT3 Center, which is our AT Act program National Technical Assistance Group. So we're working with them on platform and we're providing content, and we're excited that this is the first of a series of 6 webinars. So thank you for joining us, whether it's live or after the fact. These are going to be recorded and these will be available for review afterwards. So that in case you have colleagues that either couldn't make the registration or that just couldn't make the time work, people should be able to view this later on. So thank you again for joining us. Thank you to the AT3 Center. And we're going to start this series off by talking about accessibility in Microsoft Word. And no slides. For those of you that are accustomed to slides, in 2 weeks, I will be talking about PowerPoint. And because I'll be talking about PowerPoint, I will be working from within PowerPoint. Since we're talking about Microsoft Word today, it makes a lot of sense to just stay in Word for the next 45 minutes or an hour right now. And that's what's up in front of you. So if you can indeed see the screen and you see a Word window, you are seeing the right thing. One other note, please use the chat for questions. My colleague and coworker, Lissa Prince, is going to be monitoring the chat window along with me, and it will actually probably be easier if you ask a question in the chat when it comes to mind, because then it'll more than likely be in context of something that we're already discussing. So I think it'll be helpful not to wait until the end. Feel free to put questions there into the chat window as they come up. I think that's the majority of the logistics. And in terms of what we're actually going to discuss today, the tools and techniques that I will show you in Microsoft Word, we're going to start with 7. And for some of you, this might be a reminder of these 7 things. But we're going to look specifically at providing a title for your document. There may be a way that you think you're doing it. There's a better place to put that title, and it's a quick and easy thing to do. Then we're going to dig into the content of your documents, and we'll talk about making sure that your document has structural headings and lists, and I'll talk a little bit about the importance of all of these things as we go through the rest of the time together here. We'll talk about text equivalents for visuals, so for images and pictures and charts and graphs, things like that. We'll talk a little bit about, again, why that's needed in order for content to be accessible, and we'll also go through how to do that in Microsoft Word. I'll talk real briefly about simple data tables and how you can make a data table more accessible by identifying table header rows in Microsoft Word. And I'm going to spend a few minutes on a soapbox about how we use color. And there are really 2 parts to that. The first is making sure that texts and meaningful images contrast highly enough with the background, which we'll talk about. And I'll also talk through and describe and show some examples of using color to convey important meaning. And the last tidbit that we'll leave you with is using descriptive text for your links, for links that people might follow from within your document. The other note before I move on, I'm using Microsoft Office 2019 for today. I will point out here and there where some things are different with older versions of Office. I will also highly recommend making your way over to Office 2019 when you can. I know for a lot of you, maybe way out of your hands, but as you'll see and hear as I move through this, there are a lot of things in Office 2019 that are easier to get to, that make it easier for you to create accessible content. If you're on versions 2013 or 2016, you can still do this stuff. You just have to dig around and open up some submenus. If you're on Office 2010, I really, really encourage you to move up to the latest version. Office 2010, in terms of both creating content and, say, taking the Word file and creating a PDF from it, it just doesn't do it well enough. And it's also 10 years old, so there should be hopefully somebody in leadership or IT, if you're still on Office 2010, that you can convince to move to this latest version, because it does make things easier and it handles things like that transition from Word to PDF quite a bit better. Okay, so let's go ahead and jump in to the first bit, which is the document title. So a document title, unique to your document. Generally speaking, it's the bit of text at the very, very top. And you're going to likely have a title in reports or a book. I mean, any and everything can have a document title, and it's typically descriptive of the overall document, right? So you'll have a title that's for the whole thing, and then within that, you'll have sections and subsections. Well, interestingly enough, when you use the word style to create a title, we'll talk about word styles quite a bit today. I'm showing on the screen some of the styles that are available in Word. And this styles pane is in the first screen that opens up. Whenever you open up a Word document, it's going to look generally like it looks on the screen right now, where we have the tabs that run across the top. And I think these are consistent from certainly 2016 to 2019, but you have tabs that are labeled File, Home, Insert, Draw, etc., etc. Within each one of those tabs, then you have a collection of groups, and each one of the groups has a label that is visibly down underneath the group. And in this case, I'm on the Home tab, and I see a group labeled Clipboard. I see one for font that has the font style or the visible font itself, the font size, then visible styling you can add to the font. I have a paragraph group where I can quickly change some line spacing and some other attributes for my paragraphs. And then I have a styles group. And as you're going to hear with the section headings in particular, word styles are really important, and they're a good thing to lean on with other kinds of visible formatting. With that said, for a document title, there is a title style typically available in your group of styles. And you can select that title and it will change it visibly. But in terms of actually creating a title that, for example, will go out to a PDF as a title, we actually need to take our document title and put it into what I consider to be a little bit of a random field that's outside of this Home tab. So to get to the title field, we're actually going to open up the File tab, which is the first tab to the left, should be the first tab that you reach as you navigate around with keyboard shortcuts. I'm going to open up the File tab, and visibly off to the right-hand side, I have something labeled Properties. And in terms of keyboard shortcuts, you're looking for this Properties group of things. Within that, I have a field that's labeled Title, and that's actually where you want to put the document title, so that, again, it's available in a PDF that you create, and so that a screen reader will announce it right off the bat instead of looking for something like a file name, or instead of waiting to get into the document content to announce that. If your title is already in the document as a shortcut, you can literally copy it and then paste it into this title field. So this requires you to move out into a different tab. Otherwise, really quick to do, especially if you already have that title. Copy it, paste it into this title field, and you are good to go. So sticking with the styles, I want to talk about section headings in general and how important section headings are. I think that you generally will have section headings typed in. This gets into a part of technology in general that is really important when we talk about accessibility. And that is that whatever is visible up on the screen needs to have the appropriate structure back kind of behind the screen, if you will. So there's what you see, and what you see needs to be built right in order for the equivalent experience to be available for people who might engage the content in different ways. So with things like headings, there are certainly benefits for folks who use screen readers. There are also a lot of benefits for sighted users that don't use a screen reader when you use headings in the way that I'm going to talk through and demonstrate here in just a second. So section headings in Microsoft Word are also helpful for navigation. It makes it a lot easier for people to navigate through a document. And there's a setting that I think it was in either 2013, maybe 2016, came available for us that lets us quickly and easily navigate through a Word document. It's something that you have to turn on. I'm going to walk through it really quickly, and I'll probably just walk through it once to show you. But there is an area where we can go and say, okay, give me the bookmarks, give me different navigation points in this document, and all of those are tied to heading styles that we're going to use. So I'll come back to that thought. The other benefits of having section headings just in general is that it's how you tell someone that this particular little snippet is not just regular text. Visibly, that's done by making the font larger, maybe making it bold, adding these different visual cues to a little bit of text that tell you that this is a different kind of content. In this case, I have a heading that is literally section headings, and the font's larger, bolded, it stands apart visibly. When you use heading styles, like I'll show you in just a moment, you get that structure back behind the screen so that that information is announced, for example, to somebody using a screen reader. So again, we're looking for that equivalence in the experience. The other thing that Word has bundled in with its styles is that it serves as the foundation for the table of contents for a document. So if you do have a larger document, you want to or need to create a table of contents, Office uses your heading structure to define that. We're not going to get into the how-tos on that, barring some time at the end. It's relatively straightforward to find out how to create a table of contents, and maybe more importantly, how to update one really, really quickly and easily. If you insert a new section or you delete some stuff, and you need to change all the page numbers, as long as you have your styles applied and you've built your table of contents based on those styles, you've let Word do this work for you, it makes it so that it's easy to update when there's a change. So all of this talk about headings is leading to just how to do it, which might be surprisingly easy based on how long I've been talking about it. You're going to hop back over into the Home tab and look for the Styles group. It's generally, depending on screen resolution and font size and such, it's generally going to be to the center, to the right of the Home tab in the ribbon. And it's just labeled with styles. Within that, and I'll expand this out, it's a little compressed on my screen, so hopefully the text is readable. Within this group of styles, if you look through the list, we have everything from heading 1, and on mine, because I have several levels of headings, I go all the way out to heading 5. So we have heading 1, heading 2, all the way up to heading 5. An important note about those numbers, those don't just count the headings in the document. In other words, if you have 10 headings and subheadings, you're not just counting off from 1 to 10. What the numbers define is what the main headings are, what subheadings are. What they're really doing is defining the relationship between different chunks of content. So for example, I think in this document, I have a main heading 1 at the top, and then I have several heading 2s throughout the rest of the document. And occasionally I get on into heading 3 or 4. Each one of these numbered styles has a visible presence associated with it. So heading 1 is the largest, heading 2 is a little bit smaller, 3 is a little bit smaller still. When we get to heading 4, we see it actually change color and it's italicized. These are things that are all customizable. And that's also a little bit outside of the scope of what we're going to talk about today. But what I want to leave you with is knowing how to apply these different headings. And at the end, I do have a resource that should steer you toward how you can really use these headings to give your documents a uniform look and feel. So in other words, all of your heading 2s, your second level headings, will look the same when you apply the heading 2 style to each and every one. So I'm going to hop into my content. The next section I'm going to talk about is actually about lists. I'm going to use that to show you how to apply a heading style to an existing heading. And it actually works basically the same way when you're typing something out brand new. So in this situation, I have just the word lists. This is my next heading that I want. I again have that main heading up at the top. So this is going to be a second level heading, a heading 2. What a lot of us might have been taught, although I've seen a shift in the last few years, I think more people are learning how to do this with styles, but I've seen people just highlight this and begin to use the paragraph group or the font group to change different attributes of this text. And that only makes visible changes. There's not structure behind it that assistive technology can use to do anything with. And you lose things like your table of contents if you just apply visible changes. So instead, really, really simple. I'm going to hop over into the styles group. I've highlighted the word lists that I want to make into a heading. And I'm just going to click on heading 2. And that's it. I'm done. You can do that as well if you're typing a new document. You can just go up, select the appropriate heading level, type whatever your heading might be, and you hit enter and it'll go back to normal paragraph font. So easy peasy, a lot of benefit for those of us that type the documents up to using those heading styles, and tremendous benefits for everybody that reads our stuff. So transitioning now to talk about lists. Lists, this is another one that is actually really similar to headings in that we need to make sure that the structure behind the screen matches up with what's there visibly. So when we have a list, maybe it's a bulleted list, maybe it's a numbered list of ordered steps, we need to be sure that there's structure back there so that a screen reader, for example, will let somebody know, hey, this is a different kind of content, it's a list, and here's what to expect. And for people who are reading visibly without a screen reader, it does quite a bit when you use the word list button that I'll show you here in a moment. It does a bit to make the reading easier. It handles things like indentation. It makes sure that your list items all line up, that they're uniform, and it has consistent look and feel, again, from one list to the next in your entire document. So really important to use this. Also pretty straightforward stuff. In this case, I have a list of points, and I'll make sure that I have hit all of these before I move on. With an existing set of items, I'm actually just going to select. So I'm clicking and dragging. You can also just do a multiple select with shift control and your up and down arrow with our keyboard commands to do this same thing. I've selected each one of these lines that I want to put into my list. And all I'm going to do is hop up again into the Home tab in the paragraph group now. And I'm going to look at the very top where I have a button that looks kind of like a bulleted list, and it's labeled bullets. And then I have a button that looks like a numbered list, has numbers, and it's called numbering. In this case, I just want this to be a bulleted list. There's not really a relationship from one to the next. These are just points about lists. So I've selected the content. I click on the list button, and that's it. And as soon as that happens, I get bullets. And again, these are going to line up throughout the entire document. Everything indents nicely. It actually does put the text a little bit closer together so that it is visually more obvious that it's the same. And in this case, I've got 6 different items. When a screen reader hits this, it will announce list with 6 items. It'll read each one of the list items, and when it leaves the list and moves into a different kind of content, it will actually announce end of list. So again, much more equivalent than if someone just has these different lines of text and there's no structure to indicate that it's a list. And I see a question that came in the Q&A. Dawn asks, when using styles, if you create your own and applied them to your entire organization, will they also assist in creating the structure for screen readers, etc.? Yes, That's really a question for like the 201 level class about Word, because it's a little bit more than just going in and setting up a different set of styles and sharing. The sharing has a couple of steps to it, but very, very helpful to do that. And you can also use templates for that, Dawn. If you would like, you can build some things into a document template, and that might be a little bit easier to share across an organization. One thing to remember with a template or a set of styles that have all the headings defined the way you want them is that even if you have that stuff set, people have to remember to click on the heading levels. They have to remember to click on the bulleted list. So that just means that there's still a training component with it as well. So automating is a great start. You still need to be sure though that people know what to do when that's delivered to them. So I'm going to hop on into a conversation about visual elements. Oh, there's a question about lists, Joshua, thank you. Does it matter what type of bullet is used? I don't have an amazing answer to that. From the strictly accessibility perspective, no. I think that you could get overly creative with the type of bullet. I certainly think if you have things moving, if you have animation, if you have things flashing, well, yes, then there are accessibility considerations. But in general, I don't have access to any set of data that would tell me that round bullets are preferred to triangles, which might be preferred to anything else. So unfortunately, I can't give you a good answer. If anybody else has a data set to point to for that, then by all means jump in the chat and share your experience there. So I'm going to change gears a little bit to visuals and talk about things like images, talk about things like charts or graphs. This is a topic, as are many of these, that we could spend between 1 and 3 hours on. So we are admittedly scratching the surface, trying to get people started with the tools and the concepts here. When we talk about text equivalents for visuals, what we are thinking about is a bit of text, so something that we type up that conveys the intended meaning of that visual thing. So that chart, that image, whatever it might be. You'll hear a lot of the time people talk about this as alternative text. And alternative text is one place that a text equivalent can go. It's not the only place. This is where the conversation can get bigger. If you have a picture that is worth 1,000 words, as it were, then you probably don't want to put all of those 1,000 words into alternative text. Alternative text is a very specific little field that is associated with and tucked in kind of behind an image, and it's there to convey the text equivalent. If it's very, very long, then it may be, and likely is a good idea, to take some of that text equivalent and put it into the caption. And if you have a very long description, a very complex image, I've seen science textbooks and research reports where the images are really, really complex. And at that point, especially if you have a paragraph or so of description, I think it makes the most sense to just put it in the body of the document. Just put it in the narrative right there adjacent to the image. And you can even go into this alternative text that I'll show you in just a second and let somebody know description is in the next paragraph so that somebody knows that it's accounted for and there's a lot more information coming up. So this very specific snippet of accessibility of alternative text gets generalized kind of in the way that Kleenex gets generalized to mean, what is it in the grocery stores? Facial tissue. So alternative text is used a little more broadly. It's actually pretty specific. So I have an image here of an 8-ball. It's not a magic 8-ball. I guess it could be, but for our purposes, it's an 8-ball. And in Office 2019, this is one of the things that has changed from previous versions. Adding this alternative text is different in Office 2019. I've already inserted my image, and all I need to do is select it. So with the mouse, that's just a left click. You can also navigate through via keyboard and select or put the focus on the image. And I'm going to come up, and you would have had to been looking for this. When I select the image, up above the tabs on the ribbon, I have this new bit of text that says Picture Tools, and there is a Format tab that I'm going to click on now. The Format tab is where I can do a lot with this image. I can mess with the scaling, I can crop it, I can do, I think, more and more with every new version of Office. In this case, I'm going to focus on alt text, which is almost literally front and center in the ribbon when I have the Format Picture tab selected. And there is an icon here, and it's labeled alt text. It's in a group that's labeled accessibility. And I click on this or select this, and there's something kind of interesting that happens in 2019 by default. What happens is I have a submenu, a context menu that's opened up, and it's labeled alt text. It says, how would you describe this object and its context to someone who is blind? It gives you a recommendation to use 1 to 2 sentences. And in this case, it's already populated. It says a picture containing pool ball, pool table, sport, pool room. And there's a note that says description automatically generated. Office 2019 will guess. Well, not guess. There's software that's looking at the image and analyzing it and using a bunch of algorithms to come up with a description. And that can be a good starting place. It can also be ridiculously incorrect and outrageously unhelpful. So if you install Office 2019 and you leave this setting on to have your alt text automatically populate, make sure that you come in and double check it. Because remember what I said about alt text is usually important is what meaning does the image convey? This image, I have a black 8-ball on a gray pool table. And maybe what's important is that the felt on the pool table is gray. Well, there's no mention of the color or that it is felt. There's no mention of that at all in the alt text that popped up here automatically. So just double check this. And I see a question. Angela asks, how do you turn this off? And I am going to show you how to do that real quickly. But I wanted to see just in general, and you all can type these in as I'm going through how to turn this off. Type in questions about alternative text. Again, this could easily be an hour-long conversation in and of itself. Please fire some questions in if you have them. And to turn this off, you've got to hop over into the File menu. And you're going to look for options. It's the last option when you're in the File menu is labeled options. And you look for ease of access. Ease of access is Microsoft's built-in assistive technology and accessibility component. It's in Office. It's also in Microsoft Windows. And when I select ease of access, one of the things that I see is a section labeled automatic alt text. And it tells you here it automatically generates the alt text, and there's a checkbox labeled automatically generate alt text for me, and you can uncheck or check that there. From where I sit, I would just leave it unchecked. There are times when it's pretty good. Almost every time that I've seen it pre-populate alt text, I've gone in and changed it. I'm a control freak. I'm an only child. I would just rather go in and not have it there and type it in myself. So if I click on OK, it will stop doing that. The last thing I want to point out that's new in Office 2019, actually there are 2 more things. This next thing is there is a checkbox under the alt text field. So I'm back in, my image is selected, I have the alt text submenu open. There is a little checkbox labeled mark as decorative. This will hide an image from assistive technology. And like the label suggests, this is only in a case where the image is there just to be eye candy. It doesn't convey any meaning at all. It's not even, does it convey some kind of irrelevant meaning? It doesn't convey meaning at all. When you check that box, even if you have something in the alt text field, it should ignore it and hide it completely from assistive technology. So I can't emphasize enough how important it is to think before you check this box, because you are hiding that content from a screen reader. And there are certainly times when the screen reader doesn't need to announce something because it is only visibly there to maybe create a gap from one section to the next, or it's really just there to be visible and it doesn't convey meaning. Fine, use that, that's preferred. Just think about it before you check on that box. That option was not available in previous versions of Office. The other note that I'll make real quickly about previous versions is that when you dig into a submenu to get to the alternative text, which you have to dig a little bit in 2016 and 2013, you actually have two fields that you can type into. And I just want to point out that you need to type your alt text, what's going to be available for a screen reader to announce. You need to type that into a field labeled description. So if y'all are on an older version, a couple of pointers about some things that are different and some motivation maybe to try to get that upgrade to 2019. So images need text description. Alt text is actually where probably 80% of your text equivalents will go, maybe more depending on your content. Just remember that if it's long, feel free to use the caption. Feel free to just put it in the narrative. You have other options for describing these visuals. So yes, very, very important, critical to be sure that the content in the image comes through. When it comes to actually writing alt text, you're fundamentally trying to answer the question, what does this image mean? What meaning does it convey? With the image that was above, lends itself to using this alternative text field. I can be concise in my description. The context is already there, so the alt text will just be read in the order that a screen reader goes through the content, since all of this is pretty straightforward layout especially. You don't want to put in file names for your alternative text. You don't want to repeat your captions. That's when you can use the mark as decorative checkbox. And in general, this is not a hard and fast rule because there's not one. You can aim for 120, 150 characters. Like Microsoft says, 1 to 2 sentences. If you get past that, think about where else to put it in the document. And then I do have, and this will be available on the AT3 Center website here hopefully soon. But I've got notes in the document here about how to add alternative text, both in Office 2019 and in 2013 or 2016. So there's a good question, Angela, about is there a one-stop resource for wording protocol? And you know, this can be kind of hard to do when you're sighted. There are some. There is one for complex images that I refer people to pretty often. It's the Diagram Center, which is part of Benetech. Some of you might be familiar with Benetech. But if you search Diagram Center Accessibility, that's going to come up. I do think they have a decision tree for alternative text in there as well. The advice that I give, Angela, is how would you read it if you were reading the document to somebody on the telephone? You know, so if you were just reading the document, what would you say when you get to that image? And you might want to narrow it down a little bit. You might want to edit that a bit. But that's one of the ways that I've heard that has been helpful for me to think about coming up with that alternative text. Other questions on alt text or text equivalents in general? Okay, very good. I will move on and we'll talk a little bit about data tables. I'm going to close my submenu that is labeled alt text so I can see this data table. We talk about tables, and I'm being specific in saying data tables because you see tables that present data. So, you know, say an Excel sheet, for example, you might have, or something like this one. This one on screen is super, super simple. It literally has 3 columns. They are outrageously creatively labeled as column 1, column 2, and column 3. And under those, there are 2 rows that just have numbers. The order of the numbers doesn't really matter. It's just an example. But column 1 underneath has 6 and 3. Column 2 has 5 and 2. Column 3 has 4 and 1. So this is a data table. A layout table, I'll show an example here in just a minute. It's a matter of using table cells and columns and rows to just visibly place stuff in the document. And we'll have a conversation about that here in just a moment. So in Word, if you have a really complex table, so even this table is set up with just a single, I said even, only with this table. This is a really simple table. Again, we have 3 columns. We just have column 1, 2, and 3 headers. There are not headers on the left-hand side that apply to each row. So the way this is set up, it is as simple as you can get, and Word can do a really good job with this. I'm going to come into my table and I'm going to show you the important things to look at and describe the important things to check to be sure that this table is as accessible as Word can make it. So when I click in the table, and this will automatically happen if you insert a table from scratch, you will have access to table tools up in the Word ribbon. And the table tools pop up, that word pops up, and these options pop up dynamically, like with the image, where we could go into image properties. In table tools now, the new tab that I want to open up is the design tab. And at the far left of the design tab, I have a group labeled table style options. And I've got some checkboxes in here. The ones that I'm going to be most concerned about right now, actually the one, is the one that's labeled header row. If I check that box that says to Microsoft, make sure that you identify that row of headers at the top of the table as being headers, and that's as opposed to having them be data. So back behind the screen, this table has information that we can't see, but it's there so that a screen reader can grab it, turn around and announce it, or send it to a braille display, for example. And not only does it say column 1, column 2, and column 3 are header cells, it also says because they're header cells, we need to be sure that we announce that header whenever we get to one of the data cells that's under it. So in other words, I have the number 5 here. It's the center cell in my 3x3 table. And as I navigate through this visibly, I can see the number 5, and I can look and visibly see that column 2 is the header for it. As long as I have that header row box checked, a screen reader will also announce column 2. So again, we're looking for that equivalence. We understand that people might interact with the content slightly differently or dramatically differently because of an input device or an interaction device, but we're making it as equivalent as the tools will let us, even though the interaction is different. So again, matching what's on the screen with the structure back behind the screen. There's also a checkbox in the table style options for first column. And first column, if you leave it checked, it's actually checked by default. What that tries to do is say, okay, all of the data cells in the first column are headers for the rows that go out to their right. In messing around with it a little bit, the support still isn't amazing for screen readers. In other words, a screen reader that reads the number 5 will announce column 2 because I've got that header row box checked. But even if I check the first column box, it wasn't announcing it for me. I think it's a good idea to get in the habit of using those kinds of tools that Word or other authoring tools provide for you. Just know that some of the stuff still might not be supported. If you get into a situation where you have a table that has merged cells, that has really any more complexity to the table structure than this table does, if you want to make it accessible, then I really suggest that you kick it out to something like PDF, where you can go into Acrobat Pro and do quite a bit more. Arguably even better, you could put it out onto native web as an HTML page and make it accessible there. We at AbleTech are probably like a lot of y'all in that we've got to deliver stuff in particular file formats, so that's not always going to be possible. But if you do have a more complex table, then please do make sure that you learn how to account for that complexity and that you're using a tool that will let you do a little bit more than what Microsoft Word will do. In 2019, this is much easier because Microsoft has improved the functionality. When you check header row, it does actually mean something. Before, it was only a visible change. In 2013 and 2016, You've got to dig a little bit, get into a table menu, and ultimately you're looking for a checkbox that's labeled repeat as header row at the top of each page. So again, this reference we will make available after the fact, so you'll have this set of steps. If you want to Google repeat as header row at the top of each page, you might throw in Microsoft Word to that search. It should take you to how to do it in your version. And there's a resource that I'll show you later on that will make it so that it's a lot easier to find this by Office version and even across Mac and Windows. So I made the points about adding a bunch of other stuff for complex tables. Really, I think that if you have a more complex table, you've got to get into a different authoring tool to make it work. And you can add a summary or alternative text to a table just to let somebody know that this is complex. These cells are merged together. There are layers of table headers. So there's not just a row across the top. There's also a column across the left. And then under the row across the top, there might be other nested headers. You can add that information to the table alternative text to let people know that they're encountering a complex table. And that's going to be helpful regardless of your file format. So with layout tables, shifting gears, again, this is when you use a table and you use the cells in a table just to hold stuff in place. I can't point to accessibility standards and say you can't do that. There are kind of times when I wish I could. I can't. You do have to be careful when you do it though, because the reading order in a table is the same no matter what. What I mean by that is a screen reader in particular is always going to read a table left to right and top to bottom. So it'll read from left to right. It will read the first cell or the content if it's just one cell. It'll read that and then it'll move to the next row and read left to right. So with that in mind, I've got an example table here. And this is this is a question about visual layout. And I've got something up here on the screen. I would love for those of you who can see it to let me know, how does this read? Just type it into the chat real quick. Not everyone has to. A couple of y'all could type it in there. That would be really helpful. And I'll describe it here in just a moment. But if you can let me know, how would you read this? How does your brain account for this layout? Spaced weird, it's difficult. Helen says, is this all right? And that's, yes, that's the text that we have. What we have is the phrase, is this all right? As a question, but it's set so that it's reading from lower left to upper right. So it is funky to read, and I wouldn't suggest this for anybody. This is just confusing. The important thing to know about this is that, and somebody has mentioned this in the chat, those words are arranged the way they are in table cells. And somebody already got to the reading order thing, which is that when a screen reader reads this, it'll actually reverse the reading order. It will read, all right, this is. If you use layout tables, be super careful. My advice is to learn how to use the column layouts, for example, in Microsoft Word. They're much easier to use in the later versions than they were even in 2013, especially 2010. Learn how to use some of those different layout tools within Word to get away from using layout tables so that you just don't have to worry about this stuff. I'm going to get my color. Angela makes a comment, the Yoda is a table reader. It is a little Yoda-ish, yes. It is a little Yoda-ish. The next thing I'm going to talk about just for a couple minutes is color. And like I mentioned, there are a couple of things about color that we need to keep in mind. One, you need to keep your color contrast high. Just in general, keeping your color contrast between a font color and a background color higher is better for everybody. It doesn't at all mean you need to always use black and white. The majority of this is black and white. But you do kind of work against yourself if you have a font color that doesn't contrast real well with the background. And these issues where color contrast is really important is with visual elements and text. And what I mean when I say visual elements is you could have a little icon, for example, On the web, one of the more common ones is an icon for a search, because now those generally will have a magnifying glass shape on them. And if that magnifying glass button is gray and the little magnifying glass icon is, oh, a couple shades lighter or darker, it's not going to be very easy for people to see because of that low color contrast. I'll come back to the idea of using color to convey information here in just a moment. I've got an example here of low color contrast and an example of high, and you just need to be somewhere in the middle. With the low color contrast, it's a light gray on this white background that I have in the document. And the high color contrast goes back to black. Don't walk away saying this dude Rob says that we have to use black and white because of something called color contrast, because again, that's not true. You do need to make sure that it is indeed high enough. One other advantage that the latest, greatest Microsoft Office version has is that the built-in accessibility checker will test for this for you. I still want to very quickly show you a tool that I think is really, really helpful. I'm just going to call it the TPG Color Contrast Analyzer, and that's European spelling. So color is C-O-L-O-U-R. Contrast Analyzer is with an S, not a Z. And this is a tool that will let you check color contrast on literally anything you can bring up on your screen. So you can check it in a PDF. If you're on an older version of Office and you don't have this color contrast check in the accessibility checker, then you can use it. You may need administrative privileges on your computer to have it downloaded. And mine, I'm using a slightly older version, but the principle is the same. Real quickly, what it will let you do is select a little eyedropper tool, and it will let you select literally a pixel. So you can get into the middle of a font and either with the Enter key or the left mouse click, select the color. And in this case, the background color is already set to white. So I'm testing this super light gray against white, and it shows me down at the bottom with the word fail multiple times and with little red X's, which would be little green checks if it passed. It tells me all the way around it fails. It also shows me the ratio, which is 1.4 to 1. What we're looking for is a ratio of 4.5 to 1 as a minimum. So this tool is really, really helpful. If it's not linked, I think it's linked on the resource page that is linked out later on in this file. So again, you all will have that available. You can literally search TPG Color Contrast Analyzer, and even if you don't spell it with the OU and the S, it'll still come up. Really helpful tool. Can't recommend it enough. I'm going to harp on color just for another couple of minutes by talking about using color to convey meaning. So I have a pretty simple line graph here. I have 4 categories, and I have 3 different series of data that are plotted. The first series is shown with a blue line, second with a red line, third with a green line. Any problems jump out in your mind about the way this is done? And you can type into the chat real quick. For the sake of time, I might give it away while you're typing, and I apologize. But the issue here is that, let's say somebody is red-green colorblind, for example. You have a red line and a green line, you can't tell the difference. And it can also be that someone prints this out in grayscale, right? You get to a conference and you're like, oh shoot, I need to print out some notes for people. They only have a black and white printer in the venue, and you have what is on the screen now, which is the same thing, just in grayscale. And here you can't tell which is which at all. Again, another note about don't walk away saying Rob said this. It's not a matter of saying don't use color. Absolutely use color. A lot of the audience is going to pick up on that, and it's going to make the information maybe easier to process, quicker to process. The key thing when you use color to convey meaning is to add something else in addition to the color. So on this particular plot, I still have blue as series 1, but I've added triangles along it. I still have red as series 2, but I have diamond shapes. And series 3, the green line also has squares on it. And even where these overlap a little bit, you can still see basically going dot to dot. So now, whether someone is colorblind and can't see or distinguish the red and the green from one another, or we have that black and white printout, you can still tell which is which. Another quick example from a pie chart. I've got a pie chart here with 4 different categories. Category 1 is represented with a blue slice, 2 with orange, 3 with gray, and 4 with yellow. So I've got a couple of issues. The first problem that I have with this is, depending on the color scheme and people's acuity, it may be difficult to tell where some of the colors begin and end, especially in the middle, which it's a pie chart, you'd assume. Okay, folks know they're pie shaped. It's best to add a border so that there's a little bit better visual distinction from one to the next, but I haven't taken care of the color piece because category 1 still is just known as blue. So with a pie chart with similar kinds of data plots, with something this simple, I just moved the labels for each color so that they are adjacent to the colored slice. So category 1 is just literally visibly close to the blue slice. So I'm not using the color to convey that category distinction. I've just moved those labels in tight. Normally I harp on this longer. I'm not gonna. I just want to mention that when we do assessment work at AbleTech on websites and or non-web content like PDFs and Word docs and PowerPoints, we almost always find issues with color contrast and or using color to convey meaning. So it's something that's really, really common, and it's stuff that you can go in and control. Ultimately, you can usually control your color contrast and how you use color. So a quick note about using links. This will be our last pointer before I do a real quick overview of the accessibility checker. It's really important for people to understand what's going to happen when they follow a link. So your link text, the clicky part, or the part that you would tap or hit the enter key to follow, that needs to actually say what's going to happen. Ideally, it should make sense on its own. So in other words, taken outside of the document and put in its own document, the link text should say something that tells people this is what to expect. At a minimum, you want to avoid link text that says click here over and over again or read more. I'm sure you've encountered this on the World Wide Web, especially in news websites. No matter what context that site is in, you'll often see the panels with little, they'll have images, maybe they will have a little snippet of text, and there'll be a read more link. Well, that read more link is not outrageously descriptive. You can understand it in context. And by the letter of the standards, it clears the bar. Practically speaking, it's not amazing. And when someone uses a screen reader, they can have the reader put together and announce a list of every link on a page or in a document. And if you have 10 links that say read more, they all sound the same. So avoid falling into that habit. Add a couple of other keywords that distinguish those links from one another so they're not just click here or read more. And then my example up on the screen, it's too long to read the whole thing, pardon me, but I'll read part of it so you'll get the point. This link text begins https://www.ok.gov/Triton/module/form builder, and it just keeps going. And it ends with a series of 40 letters and numbers. It doesn't tell you anything about what to expect. So instead, all we did was embed that web address. So take that web address and tuck it in behind text that says, fill out our webinar evaluation form here. The link goes to the same place. The big difference is that the link that you actually follow is descriptive. It tells somebody what happens when they follow it. On the web, that's usually enough. When you're in Word or PowerPoint, something that people might print out, it is a good idea, and this is not standards advice, this is just best practice. It's a good idea to have that interactive part of the link be the clicky part, or the part that you actually hit enter to follow, and then just make a note of the actual website address. So if someone does print it out, they will have the website address in front of them. Otherwise, all you have is an underlined bit of text that people can't follow from a piece of paper, right? And my advice in the case of a link like this is to use bit.ly, bit.ly, or a similar kind of service that will shorten your website address to take up a lot less space. And it looks like I might have answered the question. Yeah, pardon me. So links, relatively straightforward. Again, something that we see quite a bit where we don't see descriptive link text. I want to point out just a couple of things. I know we're at time. Just a couple of things to wrap up. One, you do all this work in Word and you want it as a PDF. Don't use print to PDF. I think that's something that has kind of been handed down orally. It's a tradition that we use print to PDF to create a PDF from Word. The problem is that that creates a PDF with text in it, but none of the structure is there as of yet. At least as of right now, the headings, the list structure, the alt text, all that stuff is gone. So to create a PDF from a Word document, and this is true in Office, so we'll talk about it in a couple of weeks with PowerPoint, you want to just go to your File tab and select Save As. And what you'll see is an option, and I'll do this real quickly. You will see an option under the file name where you can select a different file type. And what you're looking for is PDF. If you select PDF as your file type and you click Save, it will create a pretty accessible PDF. Now, there are a lot of variables there. If the document's complex, some stuff could be a little bit odd, but with a document like I've shown you, it's going to be in pretty good shape when it sends out to a PDF. For those of you who have Acrobat Pro installed, you can look for the Acrobat tab in your Word ribbon. And if you open up the Acrobat tab, there's a button at the far left that just says Create PDF. That's only if you have Acrobat Pro, not Reader or any other version. But if you don't have that, if you do File, Save As, and select PDF as the file type, you're going to get a really good accessible PDF based on a lot of variables. This is the part that's still kind of broken in Office 2010, and they're not going to fix it. Microsoft has moved past that. This is something that gets better with every version of Office. Finally, and I'm just going to show this really quickly, the Word Accessibility Checker is really, really helpful. You can kick off a check of your document by going into the File tab. In the Info section that takes up the bulk of the visible real estate, there's a button in the Inspect Document section that says Check for Issues. You click on that or enter over it, and there's an option that you can select that's labeled Check Accessibility. And it'll run a report, it'll show you warnings and errors, and it will give you some pointers. It's really helpful. It's not necessarily, it's not going to cover everything, but it's really, really helpful. Errors are things you probably need to address. Warnings might be a thing, might be a problem, and you'll probably want to check them manually. You'll get some false positives. It's going to miss some stuff. Still really helpful. Still really helpful for sure. I'm going to put two links into the chat for you. One is to Microsoft and their resources on Microsoft Word and accessibility. You can go in and select your version. You can go in and select whether you're Mac or Windows, and it will teach you how to do these things and more. The other resource that I'm going to put in here is a set of accessibility resources that we put together for the AT3 Center. It's out on the AT3 Center website. And this will take you directly to a little bit about PDF and Word content. But there are a bunch of resources there as well that we think are helpful, kind of trying to distill things down a little bit so you don't just get a 500-item Google search result when you look for accessibility. So please feel free to refer to those. Again, we'll publish this entire document out there on the web. We've got 2 weeks before we come back and discuss PowerPoint. Same time, 2 o'clock Central. I think I am a little past time. So I do want to see if you have questions. I'm certainly more than happy to hang out for a bit and see what questions you all might have that we haven't answered. Otherwise, I again want to thank the AT3 Center, and I want to thank all of you for giving us your attention here this afternoon or whenever you have a chance to go through this. So with that, again, if questions come in, we'll answer. We'll let everybody know where the archive lands for the recording, and thank you very much.